We like to believe we can recognize danger, that predators look a certain way, that our instincts will fire when something is wrong, that the monsters who walk among us wear their intentions on their faces, making them easy to spot and avoid. But that's not how it works. The most dangerous people are often the most ordinary, the helpful stranger, the friendly coworker, the concerned neighbor who offers assistance when you need it most. They've learned to mimic kindness. They've perfected the appearance of trustworthiness. They know exactly what to say, how to smile, when to offer help that seems too good to refuse. The following 3 accounts come from people who almost became statistics, almost became names on missing person flyers and photos on the evening news. They survived not because they were stronger or smarter than the people who didn't. They survived because of small decisions, tiny instincts they almost ignored, moments of hesitation that created just enough space to escape. These stories are not meant to make you paranoid. They're meant to remind you that the gut feeling you sometimes dismiss, the one that says something isn't right, exists for a reason. Our ancestors survived because they listened to that feeling. Sometimes listening is the difference between a story you tell later and a story that's told about you. Story 1. The Helpful Stranger. Megan Calloway was 21 years old and 2 months into her junior year at a small liberal arts college in rural Pennsylvania when her car broke down on Route 18. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she'd been in any position to appreciate them. Instead, she was standing on the shoulder of a 2-lane road, watching steam pour from under her hood and trying not to panic. She'd been driving back from a weekend visit to her parents' house, a 3-hour trip she'd made dozens of times. The route took her through long stretches of farmland and forest, areas where cell service was spotty and other cars were rare. She'd always found the isolation peaceful. Now it felt like a trap. Her phone showed 1 bar of service, not enough to load a map or call AAA, barely enough to send a text to her roommate. Car broke down on Route 18, not sure exactly where, trying to get help. She didn't know if the message sent. The loading icon spun and then disappeared without confirmation. She was alone on an empty road as darkness crept through the trees. That's when the truck appeared, an older model truck, blue with patches of rust, slowing as it approached and pulling onto the shoulder behind her. The driver got out and walked toward her with his hands visible and a concerned expression on his face. He was middle-aged, maybe early 50s, average height, slightly overweight, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, looking exactly like the kind of person you'd expect to see in rural Pennsylvania, looking exactly like someone's dad. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was friendly, warm, the voice of someone who wanted to help. "Yeah, I don't know what happened. It just started smoking." "Mind if I take a look?" Megan stepped aside and let him peer under the hood. He made thoughtful sounds, pointed at things she didn't recognize, explained that it looked like her radiator hose had failed, that the engine had overheated, that she wasn't going anywhere in this car tonight. "Nearest gas station is about 15 miles up the road," he said. "I can give you a ride if you want, get you somewhere with a phone and a tow truck." Megan hesitated. Every safety lesson she'd ever learned screamed at her not to get in a stranger's car. But it was dark now, getting darker. Her phone wasn't working. She was alone on an empty road with no idea when another car might pass. The man seemed kind, concerned, normal. "Okay," she said. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." The truck smelled like coffee and old cigarettes. Country music played softly from the radio. The man introduced himself as Gary and made small talk about the weather, about car trouble, about how dangerous these roads could be at night. Normal conversation, friendly conversation. Megan felt herself relaxing. Maybe she'd been paranoid. Maybe not everyone was a threat. Maybe sometimes people just wanted to help. They drove for about 5 minutes before Gary turned off the main road. "Shortcut," he explained when Megan looked at him. "This way's faster, avoids the construction on 18. She didn't know about any construction. She'd driven this route dozens of times and never taken any shortcuts, but Gary seemed confident, and she didn't want to seem rude or suspicious, so she said nothing. The road narrowed, trees pressed in on both sides, no street lights, no houses, no other cars, just the headlights cutting through darkness and the growing weight of isolation pressing against Megan's chest. "How much further?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Not far, just through these woods and we'll come out right by the station." But they didn't come out. The road kept winding deeper into the forest. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 15, and Megan noticed that Gary had stopped making small talk. His hands had tightened on the steering wheel. His jaw was set in a way that looked nothing like the friendly concern he'd shown on the highway. She was afraid now, genuinely afraid, but she was also trapped in a moving vehicle with no way to call for help and no idea where she was. If she tried to jump out, she could be killed. If she confronted him, he might hurt her. She needed a plan. She needed an opportunity. She thought about her mother, about the self-defense class her mother had made her take before college. The instructor had talked about creating distance, finding moments of distraction, using whatever you had to survive. Megan took a deep breath. Then she leaned forward, gagged dramatically, and said, "Oh, God, I'm going to be sick. Please, you have to stop the car. I'm going to throw up everywhere." Gary hesitated. You could see it in his face, the calculation, the annoyance at this disruption to whatever he'd planned. But he also didn't want vomit in his truck. He slowed the vehicle, pulled to the side of the narrow road. "Make it quick," he said. His voice was different now. The warmth was gone. Megan opened the door and stumbled out. She bent over, pretending to retch, making convincing sounds. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. She counted to 3, and then she ran. She ran blindly into the forest. Branches scratched her face. Roots threatened to trip her with every step. Behind her, she heard the truck door open, heard Gary cursing, heard footsteps crashing through the underbrush. But she was younger than him, faster, more desperate. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed for rest. She found a fallen tree and crawled beneath it, pressing herself into the dirt, making herself as small as possible. She heard Gary moving through the woods, calling her name like they were old friends, like this was all a misunderstanding. "Megan? Come on, Megan. I was just trying to help. The gas station is right up ahead. You're going to get lost out here." She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't make a sound. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. She heard the truck engine start, heard it drive away. She waited another hour before she moved. Then she walked through the forest in what she hoped was the right direction, using the stars the way her father had taught her when she was a child. She found a farmhouse around midnight, a couple in their 60s who called the police and wrapped her in blankets and gave her tea while she shook and cried and tried to explain what had happened. The police found her car where she'd left it, found tire tracks from Gary's truck, found the narrow road that led into the woods and the spot where she'd jumped out and run. They asked for a description. She gave them everything she could remember: the truck, the license plate she'd memorized without realizing she was doing it, the face of the man who seemed so kind and so helpful and so concerned. Gary Voss was arrested 3 weeks later, not because of Megan's report, but because of a routine traffic stop where the officer noticed a smell coming from his truck. The subsequent investigation connected him to 3 missing women from the surrounding counties. Women who had last been seen on rural roads. Women whose cars had broken down unexpectedly. Women who had never been found. But here's the detail that haunts Megan to this day. Here's the part that makes her check her car every morning before she drives anywhere. When police examined her vehicle, they found evidence of tampering. The radiator hose hadn't failed on its own. It had been cut almost all the way through, enough to hold for a while, enough to give way at exactly the right moment. When police checked the security footage from her apartment complex, they found Gary Voss. 3 days before her breakdown, he'd been caught on camera walking through the parking lot at 4 a.m., checking cars, looking for the right target, finding Megan's sedan with its college parking sticker and its single driver who always left for weekend visits alone. Her breakdown wasn't an accident, it was planned. She was chosen, and the only reason she's alive is because she listened to the instinct that told her to pretend to be sick. The only reason she's alive is because she ran. Gary Voss is currently awaiting trial. The bodies of the missing women have never been found, but the woods where Megan fled have become part of the search area. Somewhere in that forest, the police believe, are answers that 3 families have been waiting years to find. Megan thinks about them sometimes. The women who weren't as lucky as her, who got into Gary's truck and never got out. She thinks about the small decision that saved her life. The fake vomit, the desperate run, the hour she spent hiding beneath a fallen tree. She thinks about how close she came to being one of them, and she never takes shortcuts anymore. Danielle Foster had been a nurse for 8 years by the time she started noticing the car. 8 years of 12-hour shifts at Mercy General Hospital in suburban Atlanta. 8 years of blood draws and medication rounds and holding the hands of dying patients while their families said goodbye. She'd seen enough of human suffering to develop a thick skin, a professional distance, the ability to compartmentalize the horrors of her workday and still sleep at night. She worked nights by choice, the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift that most nurses avoided. She liked the quiet, the skeleton crew, the sense that the hospital was a different place in the dark hours, more intimate and more intense, where the patients who needed her most seemed to need her a little more. The drive home was her decompression time, 40 minutes of empty highway and suburban streets, her car moving through the pre-dawn darkness while she processed whatever the night had brought. Sometimes she listened to podcasts, sometimes she sat in silence, sometimes she cried just for a few minutes, letting out the emotions she couldn't show on the floor. The first time she noticed the car, she didn't think anything of it. A dark sedan, maybe 200 feet behind her on the highway, taking the same exit, making the same turns, ending up on the same residential street before finally peeling off in a different direction 3 blocks from her house. Coincidence. People lived in her neighborhood. People drove home at 7:30 a.m. after working night shifts. It meant nothing. The second time she noticed again, same car, same distance, same route all the way to the same block before turning away. Still probably nothing. The world was full of patterns that looked meaningful but weren't. On the third night, she wrote down the first 3 letters of the license plate. By the 5th night, she'd memorized the whole thing. The car was following her, not aggressively, not obviously, just patiently, persistently, maintaining the same distance night after night, taking every turn she took, staying with her from the hospital to within sight of her home. She told herself she was being paranoid, told herself there was a reasonable explanation, told herself that if she just ignored it, it would stop. On the 6th night, she decided to test it. Instead of taking her usual route, she turned left where she normally turned right. The sedan turned left. She took a random exit off the highway, drove 3 miles in the wrong direction, then got back on, heading the original way. The sedan did the same. She pulled into a fast food parking lot, sat for 10 minutes, then pulled out and continued home. The sedan was waiting on the street, following, always following. Danielle's hands were shaking by the time she got home. She sat in her driveway for 20 minutes, too afraid to get out of her car, too afraid to call someone and explain what was happening because it sounded crazy even to her. A car was following her, a car she couldn't describe the driver of, a car that had been tracking her movements for a week. What was she supposed to do? What could anyone do? She started carrying pepper spray, started varying her route every night, taking random turns, making unpredictable choices, trying to shake whoever was behind her. But the sedan always adapted, always found her, always maintained that patient 200-foot distance like it had all the time in the world. On the 7th night, Danielle made a decision. She wasn't going home. She was going to find out who was following her or die trying. When she left the hospital that morning, she watched the sedan pull out from a side street and settle into its usual position behind her. She drove normally for 10 minutes, let the driver think this was another routine commute. Then she turned toward the DeKalb County Police Station. She watched her rearview mirror, watched the sedan hesitate at the turn, watched it slow down as if the driver was thinking, calculating, trying to figure out what she was doing. She pulled into the police station parking lot, parked as close to the entrance as possible, got out of her car and stood there in full view of the security cameras, staring at the sedan that had stopped 50 feet behind her on the road. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sedan's tires screeched. It accelerated past the station, running a red light at the intersection, disappearing into traffic. Danielle walked inside and filed a report. She had the license plate, she had dates, she had documentation, and now the police had a name: Marcus Webb, age 43, no permanent address, a record that included 2 stalking convictions and an assault charge that had been pleaded down. They put out a bulletin for his car. Marcus Webb was pulled over 3 days later for a broken tail light. When the officer approached the vehicle, Webb seemed nervous, agitated, kept glancing at the back seat, which was covered with a blanket. The officer called for backup. They searched the car. Under the blanket, they found a duffel bag. Inside, zip ties, a roll of duct tape, a hunting knife, and a shovel. In his glove compartment, they found a folder. The folder contained photographs of Danielle, photographs of her car, photographs of her apartment building, handwritten schedules of her shifts at the hospital, and printouts of her social media pages with notes scribbled in the margins about her habits, her routines, her friends, her family. He'd been planning something. The tools in his car made it clear what, and he'd been planning it for months, longer than the week he'd been following her home, longer than she'd been aware of him at all. The investigation revealed that Marcus Webb had been a patient at Mercy General 6 months ago, a minor procedure, a 2-night stay. Danielle had been his nurse. She did her job, changed his IV, explained his medications, checked on him during rounds, standard care, the kind of professional kindness she showed every patient. She didn't remember him. He remembered everything about her. In his journal, police found pages and pages about the angel who cared for him, about how her smile had changed his life, about how they were meant to be together, about how he'd find a way to make her understand. He'd been watching her since he left the hospital, following her to and from work, learning her schedule, waiting for the right moment. The week she noticed him, something had changed. He'd become more aggressive, more impatient. The duffel bag in his car suggested he'd decided to stop waiting. Danielle still works at Mercy General, still drives home at 7:30 in the morning, still treats patients with the same professional kindness that attracted Marcus Webb's obsession. But she's different now, more careful, more aware. She checks her rearview mirror constantly, memorizes license plates, varies her route in patterns that would be impossible to predict. She's installed cameras at her apartment, changed her locks, taken self-defense classes that go far beyond what most nurses need. And every time she treats a patient, every time she smiles at someone or touches their hand or shows them a moment of compassion, a part of her wonders if she's creating another Marcus Webb, if her kindness is being misread, if somewhere in the hospital someone is watching her the way he did, deciding that they belong to them. Marcus Webb is in prison now, convicted of stalking and possession of tools with intent to commit kidnapping. He'll be out in 7 years. Danielle has a calendar on her wall with that date circled. She doesn't know what she'll do when he's released. She just knows she'll be ready, because now she understands something that she didn't understand before. The thing that almost killed her wasn't a stranger's malice. It was her own kindness reflected back through a broken mind, and she'll never know until it's too late which patient might be the next one to fall in love with their angel. Story 3. The Online Friend. Jalen Mitchell was 15 years old and lonely in the particular way that 15-year-olds in small Minnesota towns are lonely. Too smart for his grade, too awkward for the popular kids, too into video games and fantasy novels and things that the other boys in his class considered weird or lame or both. His father worked long hours at a plant 40 miles away. His mother had passed away when he was 8. His older brother Marcus had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving a hole in the family that no one knew how to fill. Jalen dealt with his isolation the way most teenagers of his generation did. He went online. He found communities of people who shared his interests, joined Discord servers for the games he played, made friends who existed only as usernames and avatars, but who understood him in ways his real-life classmates never had. One of those friends was someone who called themselves Nighthawk 99. Nighthawk was 22 according to his profile, a college student who worked part-time at a gaming store. He played the same games Jalen played, liked the same music, laughed at the same jokes. They voice-chatted almost every night, talking about strategy and builds and lore, developing the kind of friendship that felt real even though they'd never met. After about 2 months, Nighthawk suggested they meet in person. "I'm driving through Minnesota next week," he said, "visiting my cousin in Duluth. I could swing by your town. We could hang out, get some food, finally meet face to face." Jalen felt a surge of excitement, then hesitation. He'd heard the warnings about meeting online strangers, but Nighthawk wasn't a stranger. They'd been talking for months. Jalen knew his real name, supposedly, had seen his photos, supposedly, knew where he worked and what he was studying, and 1,000 little details that made him feel like a real person. Besides, they were meeting in public, at the mall, in broad daylight. What could possibly go wrong? He said yes. They set a date and time. Jalen was counting down the days when something strange happened. 3 days before the meeting, Jalen got a message from someone he hadn't heard from in almost a year, a friend from his old school, someone he'd lost touch with when Jalen's family moved after Marcus's death. The friend's name was Derek Haynes. He and Jalen had been close once, back when Marcus was alive. Derek had been like a second brother, but after the accident, after the move, the friendship had faded the way childhood friendships often do. Now Derek was reaching out, asking how Jalen was doing, catching up on a year of missed conversations, and when Jalen mentioned, casually, excitedly, that he was meeting an online friend at the mall on Saturday, Derek's response was immediate: "Don't go alone." "I'm not going alone. I'm meeting someone." Someone you've never met in person, someone you don't actually know. Derek's concern seemed excessive, almost paranoid, but he wouldn't let it go. He kept pushing, kept asking questions, kept insisting that meeting strangers from the internet was dangerous no matter how well you thought you knew them. Finally, he made a suggestion. "Let me come with you. I'll pretend to be your older brother. We'll say I drove you. If the guy's legit, no big deal. If something's wrong, you'll have backup." Jalen wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he could take care of himself, but there was something in Derek's voice, an intensity that went beyond normal concern, that made him listen. "Fine," he said, "but don't embarrass me." They met at Jalen's house on Saturday. Derek looked older than Jalen remembered, more serious. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a weight that Jalen recognized from his own mirror in the months after Marcus died. They drove to the mall together, parked near the food court entrance, walked inside side by side, Jalen looking for Nighthawk while Derek scanned the crowd with an alertness that seemed almost professional. "There," Jalen said. He'd spotted the bench where they'd agreed to meet. A man was sitting there, looking at his phone, waiting. The man was not 22. He was not a college student. He was not anything like the photos he'd sent or the profile he'd created or the friend Jalen thought he'd been talking to for 2 months. He was in his mid-40s, overweight, balding, wearing clothes that were too young for him and a smile that was too eager. He looked up when Jalen approached, started to stand, then saw Derek walking beside him. The man's face changed instantly. The eager smile disappeared. Something else took its place. Fear, maybe, or calculation, the look of someone whose plan had just fallen apart. "Hey, Nighthawk," Jalen said, still not fully understanding what was happening. "Jalen? Who's this?" The man's voice was different than it had been on voice chat, higher, older, the voice of someone who had been pretending. "I'm his brother," Derek said. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Jalen and the man. The man stared at Derek for a long moment, then he stood up, grabbed his phone, and walked away, fast, not running but close, disappearing into the mall crowd before Jalen could process what had just happened. "What was that?" Jalen asked. Derek didn't answer right away. He was still watching the direction the man had gone, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Finally, he turned to Jalen with an expression that was somehow both sad and satisfied. "Let's go home," he said. "I'll explain on the way." They sat in Derek's car in Jalen's driveway for 2 hours while Derek explained everything. How he'd gotten suspicious of Nighthawk months ago, how he'd done some digging online, finding inconsistencies in the stories, photos that didn't match up, a pattern of behavior that raised every red flag. How he'd discovered that Nighthawk 99 was actually a registered sex offender named Gerald Kessler, who had been arrested 3 times for attempting to meet underage boys he'd groomed online. How Derek had been watching, waiting for the right moment to intervene. How he'd reached out to Jalen when he learned about the planned meeting, knowing that if he told the truth, if he said, "Your online friend is a predator," Jalen might not believe him, might go anyway, might end up as another victim. The police were called. Gerald Kessler was arrested at his home that evening. His computer contained conversations with dozens of minors, evidence of relationships carefully cultivated over months, plans for meetings that had been disrupted or, in some cases, carried out. Jalen was shaken when Derek finished explaining, not from fear, though that was there too, but from the realization of how close he'd come, how completely he'd been fooled, how certain he was sure that Nighthawk was exactly who he claimed to be. "How did you know?" he asked Derek. "How did you know something was wrong?" Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Jalen still thinks about years later, something he's never been able to fully explain. I didn't figure it out. Marcus did. What? The night before I messaged you, I had a dream. Marcus was there. He looked exactly like he did before the accident, and he told me you were in danger. He gave me Nighthawk's username, told me to look into it, told me not to let you go alone. Jalen didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in messages from the dead, but he also couldn't explain how Derek, who had no connection to his online life, who hadn't spoken to him in a year, had known exactly which friend to investigate, had known the precise username, had known that Saturday would be the day everything went wrong. Marcus Mitchell died 2 years before his little brother almost walked into a predator's trap, but somehow, impossibly, he was still protecting him. Jalen is 19 now. He's more careful about who he trusts online, more skeptical of people who seem too perfect, too understanding, too eager to meet in person. He keeps a picture of Marcus on his desk. Sometimes when he's about to do something risky or stupid, he looks at that picture and asks himself what Marcus would say. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, he hears an answer, a voice in the back of his mind that sounds like his brother, a voice that tells him to be careful, to pay attention, to trust the people who show up when he needs them most. Derek Haynes is still his friend. They talk every week, and every year, on the anniversary of the day they met at the mall, they visit Marcus's grave together. They never talk about the dream Derek had, never try to explain it. Some things, they've decided, don't need explanations. They just need to be grateful they happened. These 3 stories share something in common, not the type of predator or the method of approach, but the small moment that made the difference. Megan Calloway pretended to be sick. Danielle Foster drove to a police station. Jalen Mitchell accepted help from a friend who refused to let him face danger alone. Small decisions, tiny instincts, moments that seemed minor at the time, but turned out to be the difference between surviving and becoming a cautionary tale. We can't predict when we'll encounter danger. We can't control whether predators notice us, target us, choose us for whatever twisted reasons drive their behavior. But we can control how we respond. We can listen to the voice that tells us something is wrong, even when we can't explain why. We can accept help when it's offered. We can trust our gut, even when our brain insists we're being paranoid. The people in these stories are alive because they did those things, because they chose caution over courtesy, instinct over doubt, survival over politeness. They're alive because they understood something that many people learn too late. The world is full of people who seem kind and helpful and normal right up until the moment they aren't. The final lesson is simple. Trust yourself. Trust the feeling that something isn't right. Trust the friend who insists on coming along, the instinct that tells you to run, the small voice that says this person is not who they claim to be. That feeling exists because thousands of years of human evolution put it there. It saved more lives than we'll ever know. Listen to it. It might be the only thing standing between you and someone who has been waiting patiently for the moment when your guard is down. Don't give them that moment. Don't become a story that someone else tells as a warning. Be the one who got away.